The city was a beast of steel and sound, a relentless machine that thrummed with the hurried footsteps of millions. In its vast, anonymous heart, Aurora Hale was a quiet note in a loud symphony, a person who had learned the art of being invisible. It was a skill born not from shyness, but from focus. Her world was one of textbooks on human anatomy, the sterile scent of hospitals, and the quiet satisfaction of a correctly wrapped bandage. She was a nursing student, her gentle heart armored in scrubs, her dreams tethered to the simple, profound goal of easing suffering. Her evenings were often spent on a solitary walk, a ritual to wash the day's clinical intensity from her mind. This particular evening, the air was crisp, carrying the damp, earthy smell of the river that cut through the city like a dark, winding vein. She was thinking of nothing grand, perhaps just the next day's exam or the comforting weight of her favorite blanket, her footsteps a soft, rhythmic counterpoint to the city's distant growl. The scream was a needle-sharp stitch in the fabric of the evening, so brief and terrified it was almost swallowed by the rush of the water and the wind. It was followed by a splash, a sound that was horribly final. Aurora's head snapped up, her medical training kicking in before her fear could. There, in the churning, cold embrace of the river, was a small, flailing form, a shock of dark hair barely visible against the murky water. It was a child. Time didn't slow down, it fractured. The world narrowed to the space between the bank and that small, drowning boy. The thought of the current's strength, the paralyzing cold, the danger, they were facts that registered and were instantly discarded. There was no heroic speech in her mind, no internal debate. There was only a primal, undeniable command: go. She kicked off her worn sneakers, the pavement cold and rough against her socks, and dove. The cold was a physical assault, 1,000 icy needles driving the air from her lungs. The current, deceptive from the shore, was a powerful, living thing, grabbing at her clothes, pulling her under. She fought it, her strokes fueled by a terror that was not for herself. She could see him, a small, sinking shadow. Her muscles burned, her lungs screamed, but she pushed forward, her hand finally closing around the fabric of his jacket. He was heavier than he looked, weighed down by water and panic, his small hands clawing at her. "I've got you," she gasped, the words stolen by the river's roar. "I've got you." Turning them both, she used her last reserves of strength to kick for the shore, the muddy bank an impossible, distant goal. Every inch was a battle against the water's greedy pull. Then, her knees scraped against slime and rock. She stumbled, collapsing onto the muddy gravel, the boy a trembling, coughing weight in her arms. She rolled him onto his side, her nursing instincts taking over, patting his back as he choked up river water, his small body racked with sobs. He was safe. The relief was a warm flood, momentarily overpowering the cold seeping into her own bones. He was a beautiful child, with dark, frightened eyes and pale skin. He wasn't speaking, just shaking uncontrollably, his tiny fingers clutching the front of her soaked sweater as if it were the only solid thing in a spinning world. She held him close, rocking gently, her own body starting to shiver. "It's okay," she whispered into his wet hair, her voice soft and steady. "You're safe now. It's all over. You're so brave." She was so focused on him, on calming his tremors, that she didn't immediately notice the world shifting around them. The sound was first, the low, menacing purr of powerful car engines, then the sharp, final crunch of tires on gravel as two long, black vehicles slid to a halt, blocking the path. Doors opened and closed with solid, expensive-sounding thuds. Men in dark, tailored suits emerged, their faces hard, their eyes scanning the area with a practiced, dangerous efficiency. They moved with a purpose that was entirely out of place on the peaceful riverbank. And then, from the lead car, he emerged. He was tall, built with a power that his own fine suit could not conceal. His face, all sharp angles and a stern, unsmiling mouth, was a mask of cold control, but his eyes were a different story. They were a stormy, turbulent gray, and in them, Aurora saw a raw, panicked fear that was so deep it was almost painful to witness. This was not a man accustomed to fear. This was a man who inspired it. His gaze swept the scene, past his own men, past the shivering Aurora, and locked onto the boy in her arms. The fear in his eyes shattered, replaced by a relief so profound it seemed to physically stagger him for a fraction of a second. He strode forward, his steps quick and sure, and dropped to one knee in the mud, his expensive trousers be damned. "Enzo," he breathed, the name a prayer. The boy, Enzo, looked up, his tears renewing. He released his death grip on Aurora just enough to reach for the man. "Papa." Roman Vescari, though she did not know his name yet, gathered his son into his arms, holding him with a ferocity that spoke of a love as deep as the ocean. He pressed his face into the boy's wet hair, his own broad shoulders slumping for just a moment under the weight of his reprieved terror. Then, his eyes, those stormy, intelligent eyes, lifted and settled on Aurora. He looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time. He saw a young woman, drenched and shivering violently, her hair a mess, her clothes ruined, mud smeared across her cheek. But he also saw the steady, compassionate look in her eyes, the protective way she had been holding his son, the absolute lack of fear in her gaze when she looked back at him. She had just faced down a raging river, an intimidating man, even one like him, held little terror in comparison. He stood, Enzo now clinging to his neck, hiding his face. The man's voice, when he spoke, was low and measured, but it carried an undeniable weight, a finality that brooked no argument. "You pulled my son from the water." It wasn't a question. Aurora simply nodded, her teeth beginning to chatter. I was just walking," she managed to say, feeling suddenly very small under his intense scrutiny. Enzo chose that moment to peek out from the safety of his father's shoulder. His wide, dark eyes found Aurora again, and his small hand reached out, not for his father, but for her. He buried his fingers in her wet sleeve once more. "Don't go," he whispered, the words so soft they were almost carried away by the wind, but in the sudden, charged silence, they echoed like a shout. Roman's gaze shifted from his son's pleading face back to Aurora's. Something in his expression shifted, softened at the edges, then hardened again with a new, unshakable resolve. He had seen what no one else had been able to do in months. He had seen his silent, traumatized son reach out. He had seen a stranger risk everything without a moment's hesitation. In his world, such actions were not merely kindness, they were a currency more valuable than gold. A debt had been incurred, and he was a man who always settled his debts. "Your name," he commanded, though his voice was slightly less harsh. "Aurora," she whispered. "Aurora Hale." He gave a single, slow nod, as if filing the name away in a ledger of utmost importance. "Aurora Hale," he repeated, the name sounding like a solemn vow on his lips. "You saved my son's life." He paused, his eyes holding hers, trapping her in that gray, stormy gaze. "Now you belong with us. You will come to my home. You will help him. He needs you." He didn't ask. He didn't offer. He stated it as a simple, unchangeable fact of the universe, as inevitable as the sunset. Before Aurora could form a protest, could even process the sheer madness of it, one of the silent men in suits had gently but firmly taken her arm, guiding her, barefoot and dripping, toward the open door of the waiting car. She was too cold, too shocked, too overwhelmed to fight. She cast one last, bewildered look back at the river, now calm and indifferent, and then she was inside the plush, silent interior of the car, the door closing with a soft, definitive click, sealing her fate. The quiet walk was over. Her old life was over. The car ride was a silent, surreal journey from a world Aurora knew into one she could never have imagined. Seated on buttersoft leather, she watched the familiar, brightly lit streets of the city give way to winding, tree-lined roads, each turn taking them higher and further from the life she had left behind on the riverbank. Water dripped from her hair onto the immaculate interior, each drop a tiny, shameful intrusion. Roman Vescari sat opposite her, a silent, brooding statue, his son Enzo now sleeping fitfully in his arms, exhausted by terror and relief. He did not speak to her, his gaze fixed on the window, his profile sharp and unreadable against the passing darkness. Aurora wrapped her arms around herself, the shivering finally beginning to subside, replaced by a deep, gnawing anxiety. What had she done? Who were these people? The command, "You belong with us," echoed in her mind, a statement that felt less like a rescue and more like a sentence. The mansion was not merely a house, it was a fortress of stone and silence, perched on a cliffside like a sleeping predator overlooking the city lights. High walls, topped with iron spikes, gave way to imposing gates that swung open soundlessly. The car crunched along a pristine gravel driveway, stopping before a grand entrance of dark, heavy wood. As Aurora was ushered inside, her bare feet sinking into a rug that felt impossibly thick, she was met not with warmth, but with a vast, echoing opulence. The ceilings were dizzyingly high, the furniture was austere and modern, all sharp angles and cold metals. There were no family photographs on the walls, no scattered toys, no signs of lived-in comfort. It was the home of a man who owned things, not a place where a family lived. The air itself was still and cool, smelling of lemon polish and something else, something like old secrets and new fear. A stern, older woman in a severe black dress appeared, her eyes flicking over Aurora's disheveled state with barely concealed disapproval. "Mr. Vescari," she said, her voice as crisp as her uniform. "Maria," Roman replied, his voice cutting through the cavernous hall. "This is Aurora Hale. She is to be Enzo's new caretaker. Prepare the blue room for her. Find her something dry to wear." He did not wait for a response, striding away down a long, shadowy corridor with his sleeping son, leaving Aurora standing alone and dripping in the grand foyer, a lost sparrow in a gilded cage. Maria's hospitality was as efficient and cold as the house itself. Aurora was shown to a bedroom that was larger than her entire apartment. It was decorated in shades of blue and gray, beautiful and tasteful, but as impersonal as a luxury hotel suite. A stack of simple, comfortable clothes, soft sweaters and plain trousers, had been laid out on the bed, all in her size, a silent testament to the terrifying efficiency of Roman Vescari's world. After a hot shower that stung her scraped skin and washed the river's chill from her bones, Aurora dressed and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, her last conscious thought a prayer that this was all some strange, waterlogged dream. The morning light, filtering through the large, barred windows, revealed the truth. This was her new reality. Her first day was a study in quiet observation. Enzo, she quickly learned, was a ghost of a child. He followed Maria or his father with large, watchful eyes, but he rarely spoke. When he did, it was in the barest of whispers, often just a single word. The death of his mother, a subject no one discussed, had cast a long, silent shadow over his young life. Roman was a distant figure, a king in his castle. He would appear for meals, his presence sucking all the air from the room. He would ask Enzo quiet, direct questions, his voice softening marginally when he spoke to his son, but the attempts at connection were clumsy, hindered by a grief and a nature he seemed unable to overcome. He would then disappear into his study, the door closing with a firm click, or leave the mansion entirely, surrounded by his unsmiling men. Aurora, drawing on every ounce of her nursing training and her own innate gentleness, began her work not as a caretaker, but as a quiet presence. She did not force Enzo to speak. She simply sat near him, reading her own textbooks aloud, her voice a calm, steady murmur in the oppressive silence. She started drawing silly pictures on scraps of paper, a dog with 2 long legs, a cat wearing a hat, leaving them on the table near him. For 2 days, he ignored them. On the third, she came into the sunroom to find him carefully adding a balloon to the cat's paw. It was a tiny, silent victory, but it felt like a sunrise. She began to play soft music from her phone, simple piano melodies that seemed to soften the hard edges of the rooms. She would talk to him about nothing in particular, the shape of a cloud, the story behind a constellation, the silly thing a patient had said during her clinical rotation. She was building a bridge, plank by careful plank, across the chasm of his silence. It was during this time that she began to see the cracks in Roman Vescari's armor. She saw the way his eyes, heavy with a fatigue that had nothing to do with sleep, would follow Enzo with a helpless, aching love. She saw how, late one night when he thought the house was asleep, he stood alone in the grand living room, staring at a blank space on the wall as if seeing a ghost, one hand clenched into a white-knuckled fist at his side. The legend of the ruthless mafia boss began to blur, replaced by the image of a man who was profoundly, devastatingly lonely, a man drowning in a different kind of river, with no one to pull him out. The first real spark came on a rainy Thursday evening. Aurora had convinced Enzo to help her bake cookies, a messy, flowery affair that had resulted in the first real, unprompted smile she had seen on his face. The scent of vanilla and chocolate now warmed the usually sterile kitchen. Later, passing Roman's study, she saw the light was on, the door slightly ajar. He was at his desk, his head in his hands, the picture of exhaustion. On an impulse, she went to the kitchen, prepared a cup of tea exactly as she had observed Maria make it for him, black, 1 sugar, and carried it to his door. She knocked softly. He looked up, his gray eyes shadowed, the storm in them momentarily stilled by surprise. "Aurora. I thought you might like this," she said, her voice softer than she intended. She stepped into the room, placing the cup on the desk. It was then she noticed the faint, dark bruise coloring his knuckles, a testament to a violence he kept hidden from his son. He looked from the tea to her face, his expression unreadable. "Thank you," he said, his voice a low rumble. As he reached for the cup, his fingers brushed against hers. The contact was brief, a mere whisper of skin against skin, but it sent a jolt, a sudden, shocking heat, straight up her arm. It was not the cold fear she expected, but something entirely different, something warm and alive and deeply unsettling. She pulled her hand back as if burned, her eyes flying to his. He had felt it too. The storm in his eyes had returned, but it was a different kind of storm now, one of confusion and a sudden, fierce awareness. He held her gaze for a long, charged moment, the air in the room growing thick and difficult to breathe. "You should get some rest," he finally said, his voice slightly hoarse, breaking the spell. She fled, the memory of his touch burning on her skin. After that, everything changed. A new, tense awareness hummed between them. Roman began to appear more often. He would linger after dinner, asking her vague questions about her studies, his intense gaze making her feel both exposed and seen in a way she never had been before. He started giving small, silent commands to his staff regarding her comfort. A warmer blanket appeared on her bed. The books she had mentioned liking once found their way to a small table in the sunroom. He was a man of action, not words, and his actions began to speak of a growing, possessive care that was as thrilling as it was terrifying. The need to protect her was evident in the way his men now subtly shadowed her movements in the garden, in the way he himself would scan a room before she entered it. But it was mixed with a different need, a more personal one, a desire simply to be near the warmth she radiated. The tension came to a head one still night. Aurora had gotten up for a glass of water and, out of habit, peeked into Enzo's room. He was sleeping peacefully, one small hand curled under his cheek. As she turned to leave, she found Roman standing in the doorway, having had the same thought. They were alone in the dim hallway, the only light coming from the night light in Enzo's room. He was close, so close she could smell the clean, sharp scent of his soap and something darker, uniquely him. "He looks so peaceful now," Roman murmured, his voice a low vibration in the quiet. "He didn't have nightmares tonight. That is because of you." Aurora's heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. He just needed to feel safe. "He does with you," Roman said, his gaze dropping to her lips. He reached out, his movements slow, deliberate, as if giving her every opportunity to pull away. His fingers, those same bruised, powerful knuckles, gently traced the line of her jaw. His touch was surprisingly tender, a whisper of callous skin that sent a cascade of shivers through her entire body. Her breath hitched. He leaned in, the space between them vanishing, charged with an electric anticipation. She could feel the warmth of his breath, see the dark intensity in his eyes, and every part of her was leaning toward him, answering a call she hadn't known her soul could make. But he stopped. A hair's breadth from her lips, he froze. A shadow crossed his face, a grim, painful reality dousing the heat in his eyes. He pulled back, his hand falling to his side. "This is a mistake," he said, the words rough, torn from him. "My world, it is not for you. To want this, to want you, it puts a target on your back that was not there before." The raw confession, the admission that he wanted her, was more devastating than any kiss could have been. He turned and walked away, his broad back rigid with restraint, leaving her alone in the hallway, her skin tingling and her heart aching with a strange, profound loss for something she had only just begun to understand. The silence of the mansion closed in around her, but it was a different silence now, filled not with emptiness, but with the echoing, unspoken promise of what could be. The silence in the wake of Roman's retreat was a living, breathing entity. It pulsed with the words he had left hanging in the air. "I want you," a confession that had somehow made the vast, cold mansion feel both smaller and more dangerous. Aurora stood frozen in the dim hallway, her skin still humming where his fingers had traced her jaw. The almost kiss was a ghost between them, a moment of pure possibility that had been shattered by the grim reality of his life. 4 days, a new, fragile dance began. Roman was more distant, his conversations clipped and formal, as if building a wall stone by stone between them. Yet, his watchfulness intensified. She would feel his gaze on her from across a room, a heavy, heated weight that would vanish the moment she turned to meet it. He was a man at war with himself, his desire for her a perceived vulnerability, a crack in the armor he believed could get her killed. Aurora, for her part, tried to focus on Enzo, whose quiet world was blossoming under her care. The boy was speaking in full sentences now, his laughter, a sound as rare and precious as sunlight in winter, beginning to echo through the halls. He was the innocent, beating heart at the center of their tangled lives, the one pure thing they both fiercely protected. The threat, when it came, did so with the quiet precision Roman had feared. It was Leo, his most trusted guard and a man whose face was usually an unreadable mask, who brought the news. Aurora was in the library, helping Enzo sound out words in a storybook, when she saw Leo approach Roman in the garden outside the window. Even from a distance, she saw the way Roman's posture stiffened, his shoulders squaring as if bracing for a physical blow. He listened, his face hardening into a mask of cold fury. A few moments later, he strode into the library, the air chilling with his presence. "Aurora." "A word," he said, his voice dangerously calm. In his study, With the door firmly closed, he told her. The Volkov family. My rivals. They know about you. They see you as a point of influence. He would not use the word weakness. They plan to take you. To use you to control me. He turned to face the window, his back to her. You need to leave. Tonight. I have a car. I have a place, far from here, where you will be safe. You can have a normal life. The words were logical, protective, and they shattered something inside her. For the first time, Aurora did not feel like a passive guest in his world. A fierce, defiant courage, the same courage that had driven her into the river, rose up in her chest. No, she said, her voice clear and steady. Roman turned, stunned by the refusal. Aurora, this is not a game. These men. I know what they are, she interrupted, taking a step toward him. I've seen the shadows in your eyes. I've seen the men who guard these gates. But I am not leaving. She stood before him, her chin raised, her eyes blazing with a conviction that left him breathless. Enzo needs me. He's just started to find his voice again. What would it do to him if I just disappeared? And you? Her voice softened, breaking slightly. You told me I belonged with you. Was that a lie? The control he had so painstakingly maintained snapped. No, he growled, the word ripped from the depths of his soul. He closed the distance between them in one swift movement, his hands coming up to frame her face, not with the tentative tenderness of before, but with a raw, desperate possession. It was not a lie. I have tried to stay away. I have tried to let you go for your own good. But I can't. His eyes searched hers, the storm within them finally breaking free. I need you too much. And then his lips were on hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a confession, a claiming, a release of weeks of pent-up longing and fierce, protective need. It was a kiss that held the violence of his world and the surprising gentleness he reserved only for her. Aurora met him with equal fervor, her hands clutching at his shoulders, her entire being melting into the heat and truth of it. All the unspoken words, the stolen glances, the electric tension, it all coalesced into this single, world-altering moment. When they finally broke apart, breathless, foreheads resting together, the last of the walls between them had crumbled to dust. Then let them come, Aurora whispered against his lips. I'm not afraid. I'm yours. This newfound unity was tested sooner than any of them could have imagined. A few days later, under the guise of a rare family outing to a quiet, private museum, the Volkovs struck. It was a perfectly orchestrated ambush. As they walked from the car, the peaceful silence was shattered by the roar of approaching vehicles, men spilling out with a focused, brutal intent. Roman's guards reacted instantly, a shield of loyal muscle and violence. Roman shoved Aurora and Enzo behind him, his own body becoming their fortress. Stay down, he commanded, his voice a whip-crack of authority. What happened next was a blur of controlled chaos. Aurora, crouching over a terrified Enzo, saw a side of Roman she had only heard whispers of. He moved with a lethal, terrifying grace, disarming one man with a brutal efficiency, his movements economical and devastating. He was not just a man in a suit, he was a weapon, honed and unleashed. He fought not with anger, but with a cold, calculated fury, every blow a message, every takedown a promise of retribution. He was protecting what was his, and in that moment, Aurora understood the true depth of the monster she had chosen to love. He was not a monster of cruelty, but of ferocious, unwavering loyalty. When the last assailant lay subdued and the screaming sirens of his own reinforcements filled the air, Roman's gaze immediately found hers. His knuckles were bleeding, his suit jacket torn, but his eyes held only one question: are you safe? In that look, she saw everything. His love, his fear, his unwavering commitment. She gave him a small, steady nod, and the storm in his eyes finally stilled. The aftermath of the attack settled over the mansion not as a shadow of fear, but as a dawn of absolute certainty. The Volkov threat was ruthlessly and permanently erased, a message sent to the entire underworld: Aurora Hale was not a weakness. She was Roman Vescari's ultimate strength, his hill to die on, and to touch her was to sign your own death warrant. The knowledge brought a strange, peaceful security. Life within the stone walls began to transform. The silence was no longer cold and empty, but warm and comfortable, filled with the sounds of a family. Enzo, having witnessed his father's ultimate protection, seemed to shed the last of his fears, his personality emerging bright and whole. One golden afternoon, they were in the sprawling garden, a place that had once felt like just another part of the gilded cage but now felt like home. Enzo was chasing a bright yellow butterfly, his laughter ringing out, a sound of pure, unburdened joy. Roman stood with Aurora, his arm wrapped firmly around her waist, holding her close to his side. He no longer hid the softness in his eyes when he looked at her, no longer fought the peace she brought to his soul. He pressed a kiss to her temple, a simple, domestic gesture that held more meaning than any grand declaration. "He's happy," Roman murmured, watching his son. "We're happy," Aurora corrected softly, leaning her head against his shoulder. She looked out at the garden, at the boy who had been the glue for their broken pieces, and at the man who had given her a love as deep and fierce as the ocean. She had dived into a river to save a child, and in doing so, she had salvaged the heart of a man everyone feared. She had seen the monster up close and had found not a beast, but a protector, a partner, a man who had been waiting his whole life for someone brave enough to love him. And he, in turn, had given her a world, a family, and a love that would stand against any storm. The monster's heart was hers, and he held her own, forever. If you were swept away by Aurora and Roman's story of dangerous love and a rescued heart, subscribe to the channel. Your next favorite romance is just a click away, so don't miss a single story. Subscribe now and join us for the next unforgettable journey.